Thank you for joining me for this Lifeway study of the book of Genesis. This is session 7. The title is Land, and the text is Genesis chapter 8, verse 10 through 22. The lesson summary statement is Restoration awaits those who trust God. It's a familiar story of that found in fiction books and in movies, and that is the world's dying, and there has been the discovery of another world that would sustain human life. And so there is a lottery, or there are standards, and a capsule of people are picked in which to travel to that distant land and to reestablish humanity. And there's a sense in which you see that happening here in the story of Noah. Now, let's say there's only a little bit of room in the spaceship that's going to take people to this new planet to start over a new civilization. What are some of the criteria that would be established to help us determine who gets on that boat or gets on that ship in this case, and who has to stay behind? And so I'm wanting to ask the class to do that, to come up with that kind of conversation. And I just imagine that our Sunday school class is going to have some different qualifications than maybe a schoolroom classroom. But after that, I'm going to ask the class, I said, do you think we would do better after what we've gone through? I mean, we've had centuries of mistakes and time to learn from them. Do you think that sending this new group to another world, start another civilization, do you think it would come out any better? Well, the trouble is that it would not, because there is corruption and wickedness in our heart, and in time, eventually, our self-centeredness and selfishness would begin to reassert itself in that new establishment of society. Chapter 8, verse 1 is the center of the account of Noah's flood, from chapter 6, verse 9 to chapter 9, verse 19. And what you have is, in the first half of this, is the destruction of all living creatures on the face of the earth. And then what comes afterwards is the renewal and the repopulation of the earth, and it starts with Noah and his family. Now, Noah's event comes halfway from Adam to Noah, and then from Noah to Abraham. And what you notice is from Adam to Noah, there are centuries, there's millennia of time in which the biblical writer just leaps over those and goes from Adam to Noah. And then after Noah, again, there is this leap of time, with maybe the exception of the Tower of Babel, and then you come to Abraham. And it points out just how significant the person of Noah and the judgment of the flood is. It's as if Moses comes to a standstill as he begins to describe this man and this event. In fact, this event is so significant that it takes 3 sessions of our Sunday school to cover this event in the 600th year of Noah's life. Now, our first point in this passage is wait. Restoration awaits those who trust God. I found a timeline on the internet. This is from Answers in Genesis website. It's called Biblical Overview of the Flood Timeline. And I was able to make a copy of the timeline that it talks about on the front and back. I'm going to give that to the class so that we can talk about it and just put things in perspective about what's happening. So we'll go over that quickly. But then the longer article that's attached to it, I copied that off so that I could read through it and have information to share in addition to what's on the timeline. But I thought it would be helpful to the class for us to just have a timeline of these events, 150 days in which the waters are surging and covering the earth, and 150 days in which the waters begin to abate. And Noah being in that ark for at least a year, some say a year and 10 days. And so after that, then I want to read the account in verses 10 through 14. and just make some comments from what I have learned in my Leader's Guide. I would point out the word Noah means rest and relief. And what we have here is God's wrath is over, and through His mercy, they have survived. They are starting over. And the one that leads them out, coming from this judgment, is the one who's known as the rest. And it's a preview of the one who will one day give us true rest found in Jesus Christ. Now, there's an interesting comment about the difference between ravens and doves found in your Leader's Guide. The raven was stronger, could fly further. He lived off carrion, so he could find something to eat. The dove is not as good a flyer, and the dove, though, lives off of seeds and insects. And so he would be a good indicator of whether the water on the earth's surface was going down. And so when the dove returns, it indicates to Noah that the water had remained on the surface. When he goes out again and he brings back the olive branch, it's proof that the water is abating. And then when he goes out a third time and he doesn't return, then Noah knows that the water is gone and the earth is drying. And that's when he removes the roof so that he can see that the earth is dry. And so I would just read through this and make some comments about it that you can find in your material that you have as well. And then I want to take the class to look at this lesson summary statement in order to apply this idea of wait. You'll notice the statement again. Restoration awaits those who trust God. So I looked up in the dictionary the word restoration, and the definition is to bring back or to put back into a former or original state. I looked up the word await, and it means to stay in a state of waiting. So restoration awaits those who trust God. And of course, the Bible dictionary for trust means assured reliance on the character, strength, attributes, ability, and truth of someone or something. So I'm asking the class, how would you restate this lesson summary statement in light of the fact that restoration is to bring back or to put back, and that await means to remain in a state of waiting, and trusting means assured reliance on the character, the strength, the ability, or the truth of someone? How would you restate this? And I'm going to give them an example. Here's my example. When I continue to be faithful and obedient to God, He changes my life. And so I'm seeing that the word trust, trusting God, is seen in me being faithful and obedient. For that's what we're learning about Noah. And when I'm done that, it changes my life. So I'm just going to solicit some suggestions from them on how to do that. Now, Genesis will end with another powerful story of a biblical character who's waiting on God. He's waiting on God to keep His promises, and that character is Joseph. So I'm asking the class, how did God restore Joseph? Because he had to wait on God's promises to be fulfilled. And I'm trusting many in the class will know the story and be able to give me some examples of how God did a work in Joseph's life because Joseph had to wait on God to keep His promises. And during that time, he was obedient. All of us are in a holding pattern. For those of us who are believers in Jesus Christ, we're all holding for the second coming of Jesus Christ. It may be there are people in the class who are waiting on the results of a test. Well, look at the lesson summary statement again. It's simply saying that waiting can be a redemptive effort in our lives. That God can use waiting to do some things in our lives. And our proper response during these times and this state of waiting is to trust God. And He uses that to bring us where He wants us to be. that is to restore us. So our first point is wait. And then the second point is to exit. Genesis chapter 8, verse 15 to 19. Again, I just want to read through the text. I want to make some notes from some things I've learned in my studies. Verse 15, then God spoke to Noah. You know, it's been a year since God spoke to Noah. So he's gone a whole year just simply doing the last thing God told him to do. Verse 16, you'll notice this is a frequent phrase. Come out of the ark, you, your wife, your sons, and your sons' wives with you. Bring out all the living creatures that are with you, birds, livestock, those that crawl on the earth, and they'll spread over the earth and be fruitful and multiply on the earth. And some of that should sound familiar from our creation account in Genesis chapter 1 and 2. For this is the way that God created the animals. We're told about the birds being created on the fifth day. We're then told that livestock and crawling creatures were created on the sixth day. And then they were also given this commandment to be fruitful and multiply. And so what you have here is another story of creation. Verse 18, so Noah, along with his sons, his wife, and his sons' wives, came out. It's a picture of obedience. All the animals, all the creatures that crawl, and all the flying creatures, everything that moves on the earth. Can you imagine that? Just take a moment maybe with your class and just imagine what that must have been like. Noah steps out of the ark, and then the skies are filled with the birds that have been in the ark as all their beautiful colors, as they fly away to begin to possess the earth. And then the animals, as they come out and they see this. It must have been an amazing sight. And then the last phrase, came out of the ark by their families. And your commentary has some good helps there for you. Now, to apply this, you see on page 72 in the personal study guide, and of course in your leader's guide, it's on page 85, is the application point. Do you see the application point? People find restoration through a trusting obedience to the Father. And that's what you learn about Noah, is this is a man who has this amazing response of obedience to God. Never in history had anyone been asked to do what he did. And what is the response? He just simply obeys. I've always thought that Noah would be anxious to get out of the boat when it was time to go. But when you think about it, he may not have been so anxious. That boat has been his safe haven for a year or more. And he's going into a world that is very, very different than the world he stepped out of. And there may have been a great deal of fear, but instead of letting this worldwide catastrophe hinder him, he steps out of the boat in obedience to God. Now, what is it that needs to be restored? For you see, our lesson summary statement says there needs to be restoration. Well, obviously what needs to be restored is the world and God's purposes for this world, but also God's image in man. It also has been restored. And so what I'm wanting the class to see is that it is in this act of obedience that God does a work of restoration in our life and in our world. And I'm trying to apply this application point. People find restoration through a trusting obedience to the Father. For example, what does the Scripture say and describe for a Christian husband? What is the image of a Christian husband? And I may want to write some of those things on the board. Well, this lesson is saying that in order for that image of a Christian husband to be formed in me, it's going to require me to be obedient to God. So what do I, as a Christian husband, have to do in obedience to God to form in me the picture of a Christian husband, the image of a Christian husband? Now, your class is going to be different, so you could use a different dynamic. Maybe if it's women, of course, a women's a mother or a wife. If it's youth, maybe you're saying, a Christian youth obedient to my parents, or maybe something altogether different. But what I'm trying to develop in this lesson is that this idea of exit, the idea is he's being obedient to God. And as he steps towards his obedience to God, it has this work of restoration. God putting back into place, God returning him to what he was intended to be in the first place. Now, not just me personally or you personally, but what about this world that we live in? God has a desire, a purpose for this world. There's an image he has that he wants developed in this world. So what are those kinds of things that can be restored? How might our class act in a way that would be obedient to God, that would have an act of restoration in this world? So there is exit. The last point is worship. Genesis chapter 8, verse 20 to 22. Restoration awaits those who trust God. Now, if you contrast verse 15, then God spoke to Noah, with verse 20, then Noah built an altar to the Lord. This tells us that the first act of Noah, when he stepped on dry ground, was sacrifice. He took a time to worship God. Now, what is Noah admitting when he makes this his very first act in this new world? When he makes a sacrifice, what's going on here? Well, one of the things that I'm looking for in terms of my class's response is Noah needs more than just a new start. What Noah needs is a renewed relationship with his Creator. And he recognized if this is going to be different than what I just left, it's going to require a relationship with the living God. And I want to move from that to reading through these verses and adding some insights that I've gained from my study. And you'll want to do that as well. What's supposed to happen in a worship service? And just list those on the board. Now, how does that shape me into the image of God? Let me give you an example. What's supposed to happen in a worship service is it's supposed to be Christ-centered and not me-centered. The music is to be Christ-centered. The sermon is to be Christ-centered. The prayers are to be Christ-centered. When I come to that hour of worship, at the focus of my worship is Jesus Christ and not me. So my question is, how does that shape me? How does that go to work in my life to restore me to the image of the living God? Because restoration awaits for those who trust God. Well, one of the things I'm saying that happens is when I come to a worship service and I'm reminded again that I'm supposed to be focusing on Christ. It does something about my priorities. I have to examine what's most important in my life. Am I an idolater? Or am I a true worshiper of God? It deals with my motives. Why do I do what I do? Am I doing it for the glory of God? Or am I doing it for my own self-preservation? You see, what happens in worship is to be a work of restoration. Let me give you another example. What does worship remind me about my sin? It reminds me I need to confess my sin. I'm reminded I need to deal with my self-righteousness and my self-justifications. It reminds me that I need to receive forgiveness for my sin. So my point is that you can walk through a worship service and talk about the different things that are to happen in a worship service. For example, the issue of offerings. That's an act of worship. What is that supposed to teach me about the living God and my relationship with Him? And so what I'm wanting to lead the class to as we talk through the elements of a worship service
is this is to bring me to God and to remind me what I need to get back to and what God has actually called me to. That's what I'm trying to achieve in this point on worship. Noah came to recognize he needed more than a fresh start. Noah came to recognize he needed God. And so our lesson summary statement says restoration awaits those who trust God. To close the lesson, I have here a can of air sanitizer, and I'm going to spray it in the classroom and ask the class if they can smell the difference that it does in terms of changing the air. Well, of course they will, but it's only a temporary change. It doesn't last. And the only place we're going to find the kind of permanent changes that has a lasting impact on our life is our relationship with God. Because restoration awaits for those who trust God. Isn't that a hopeful statement? Isn't that what your class is longing for? They want to return to what God intended them to be. Well, this lesson just lays it out here. Be like Noah. Trust and obey. For there's no other way to be happy in Jesus except to trust and obey. God bless you for teaching the Word of God. I'm praying for you.